One on the left side. Having trouble getting from compound to compound without getting ambushed? Tired of getting randomly domed as you venture through the bayou? Then look no further, as I have researched the safest routes to get from point A to point B in order to minimize these situations. Good evening, or good day, it all depends, and welcome back to the Impossible Ironman channel. This video will cover the pathing for Lawson Delta, but I have one for Stillwater Bayou as well, link in the description, and I have not made one for DeSalle yet. I have the routes recorded on this map here. It will be available for download in the video description, and other details about it can be found there as well. Keep in mind throughout the video that these routes can be used in either direction. Please note as we get into our first route that the title at the top will match the color of the route on my map for easy cross-referencing. The goal of most of these routes is to make sure the compound you're heading towards does not have line of sight on you as you approach. Seeing as that players crossing the road and moving up through the swamp is fairly common when approaching Blanc, this slightly more roundabout approach allows for minimal exposure to the surrounding area. Even players on the Blanc rooftops will have little to no LOS on this section, and a team leaving Blanc to head towards, say, Ma, won't see anyone this out of the way. Of note, when you go to cross the road coming up here, there is often an extraction in that location, and while there isn't much AI in the trees, there is often an immolator here on the road near where that extraction typically is. This path also allows you to cross the most narrow portion of water in this area, which will allow you to not have to penalize your movement speed so long as you use a well-timed frog hop, which I unfortunately didn't do in the clip. This will allow you to use an approach both abundant in cover and difficult for anyone at the compound to defend without overextending. Starting the Lawson de Blanc route, I know this one is sort of strange, and you might ask, why not just go straight towards Blanc through the forest? There is plenty of cover after all. While this is true to some extent, the direct route has one serious problem. You're likely to get sandwiched by another team coming up behind you from Lawson Station, since it is such a high-traffic area. At that point, you have nowhere to fall back to and are unlikely to survive the crossfire between the two compounds. Even when traveling the opposite direction from Blanc to Lawson, Lawson has extremely long sightlines on this approach from a multitude of angles, meaning you're likely to get shot at before you make it within the walls of the compound. While this route is very out of the way, it utilizes a part of the map that rarely sees any activity unless Golden is the boss layer, so you're highly unlikely to get ambushed along the way. The only thing to be wary of is if there is an extraction where you have to cross the road here, as players could be waiting near it. Otherwise, while crossing open roads is often risky, in this case no one would have a reason to look over here unless you've recently triggered a sound trap. Following this route will put you in an area with better cover and room to maneuver should you need to, as well as difficult to contest access to the compound. Beginning the Lawson to Godard route, you'll have to be very careful when you first venture outside of the walls of Lawson Station, as the forest here is a high-traffic area. We'll use this pathing to cut through the forest in between Lawson, Ma, and Godard, so as to avoid the big open field you have to traverse if you head straight between the two compounds. Be wary of Blanc sightlines as you travel, and try to keep some of the foliage at your side for cover. Keep an ear out for a team heading north from Ma. Should you encounter the team from that direction, you have plenty of cover to use, and may even be able to catch someone crossing water with a well-timed ambush. While I'm showcasing this route, I would like to take a quick moment to say that if you've enjoyed the information in this video so far, and/or enjoy some Hunt Showdown related guides, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, as it helps out the channel immensely. Thank you in advance. Also, if you're looking for resources from my guides, such as the pathing map that I designed for this video and the one for Stillwater Bayou, or other cool behind-the-scenes information from my research that I conduct for my guides, it can be found in my Discord channel, the Impossible Iron Discord. Link to that is also in the description below. Lastly, if you would like to talk to me about some of this stuff directly, I am also live here on YouTube Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 p.m. MST. Everyone is welcome. You can look for angles without even having to cross the road here, but should you have a more close-range loadout, this is usually a solid approach, so long as the team isn't coming in from behind you from Maw. The start of Lawson to Maw route uses the same start as the Lawson to Godard pathing, so we'll start from the white hut adjacent to the ruins. You'll have to be wary of players running across the rooftops at Maw, as there is no way to approach without briefly establishing some sight lines along the way. Odds are low that anyone would be looking in your direction, however, so most of the time you won't have to deal with opposition from the lair in this way. After this, you'll have to be wary of the sniper tower. I like to check it with the beetle before rotating around it, as hunters love to hide up there. At this point, you can do any number of things based on your setup. You can shoot from the tree line, claim the sniper tower for yourself, or push into the compound from this small blind spot. Starting the Lawson to Arden route, this pathing will allow you to stay out of line of sight of those pesky rooftop snipers that tend to show up at Arden. This pathing is also designed to avoid the open field in between the two compounds, minimizing your exposure to teams in the direction of Sweetbell. Your biggest concern here will be a team approaching from Salters, so stay frosty and regularly check in that direction. Should you encounter a team coming in from the north, you should have plenty of cover to utilize without opening sightlines towards Arden. Coming up, there'll be some brief windows of exposure to the Golden compound, as well as some sightlines from the Salters compound. Based on how far you are into the match, how your map is graying out, etc., you might want to consider altering this route slightly, depending on if you think either of these factors is a risk at the current time. Something to keep in mind in this stretch of forest as well is that if any of these compounds nearby happens to be the boss lair, this is a very popular camping spot. Depending on your weapons, you could open fire from any of these solid chunks of forest, as there's lots of cover and ways to fall back. Should you have a shorter range loadout, however, this section here will allow you to rotate around to the spot that has the most cover when approaching the main building. You'll have to be careful though, as snipers sit in these tree lines frequently, and players often hide around or under some of the surrounding houses. Don't tunnel vision too much on the main compound as you rotate around, and be sure not to accidentally stumble into a team holding angles from the bushes. Generally speaking, this bridge is a pretty safe cross most of the time. Players are rarely this far down the river, and Arden does not have a very good sight line on this bridge. See the fence line coming up there? Once you get to the end of it on the left, in between the fence and some mounds is a spot where players really love to set up ambushes. So don't do what I'm about to do here and pass it without checking the corner. Also of note, while this is the safest side to approach Arden from the outside, should you intend to get inside the main building, the safest spot to breach is actually on the west side of the main building. So once you get within the inner walls of the compound, try and rotate around to that side if you think it is safe. Beginning the Golden to Lawson route, the path between the two compounds is really straightforward. Just be careful if you trigger a sound trap in Golden, as a team from Salters could easily hide behind the mounds just outside the walls and ambush you. Consider shifting to the Lawson Blanc route should this happen. When heading from Lawson to Golden, since you can't hop the fence in both directions, I suggest rotating around until you're coming in from the same direction as the Salters to Golden route, which is up next. Be careful as you approach this entrance, as there's often an immolator spawn near here that could give away your position. Starting the Salters to Golden route, I should note that the main road between the two compounds and using the cornfield in front of Salters as cover when traveling in either direction are two of the most common approaches in the game, and if a team suspects that you might show up there based on map grayout or sound traps, you will almost certainly get ambushed. This pathing allows you to avoid the common ambush area and provides a way to get into the compound without having to cross an open road first or maneuver near what is almost always an active dog kennel on the edge of Golden. Not to mention, this also cuts off sightlines from Lawson Station, meaning a team that may have moved on from Golden or one coming up from Blanc won't look over and spot you. Typically very few sound traps in this area, just the occasional grunt, and I believe there might be a hive spawn or two in this stretch of forest. As you start to come up to the river though, this is a good time to consider using a beetle to scout on the other side of the water if you suspect there might be teams lurking around. That way you can get the upper hand on them as you sneak across and give them the business. While crossing water is often risky, players have little reason to be over in this section of the map unless there's actively fighting around Golden. Let's begin the Maw to Godard route. Leaving from the south side of Maw will help you avoid a team that could potentially be lying in wait in the tree line just north of Maw. This will also prevent you from accidentally running into a team coming from Blanc. Occasionally there is an extraction boat by this white shack here, and while the compounds of Maw and Godard have a tough time establishing a direct line of sight on this extraction area, there are various long-range sight lines on the water there. So be very careful as you go by that location. You may want to consider altering your route a bit if the extraction is there and or if one of the boss layers is Maw or Godard. As you approach the road coming up here, keep in mind that there are a few different hive spawns in this area that could potentially give away your position. This approach is almost always safe, but due to how far out of the way it is, just be wary of sightlines from the small sniper tower off to the right of this position. Starting the Windy to Arden route, this brief path is designed to help you avoid the long sightline that is the road in front of Windy, as well as sightlines from the north should players be looking through the fence across the open field, in between Windy and Salters, and of course, views from the top of the Arden compound. Be wary as you pull up to the houses here, as there are often a couple different hive spawns behind them. Beginning the Windy to Salters route, this path will pick up from the area where you would head towards Arden, but instead we will be going north to the end of the fence line on the right, then east before we cross the river so as to minimize sightlines from Arden as well as the Salters compound. If you are concerned about a team possibly being in the main Arden building, I suggest heading further east to the bridge before crossing. The bridge there is usually uncontested considering how out of the way it is. As you come up to the road here, there's going to be some mounds on your left that will occasionally have players camping around them should Salters be the active boss layer. Consider going further to your right if this is the case. Starting the Hemlock to Windy route, leaving from the east side of the compound will minimize the potential for a team coming in from Nicholls spotting you as you leave. This approach will allow you to stay out of the line of sight of the big window on the south end of the main Windy Run building, as well as teams using the main road to the west. Things I wanted to mention about the barn coming up here. You can get on top of it if you'd like to find some angles on Windy, but it does make you a little bit vulnerable to the surrounding area. I don't showcase how to do it here, but there are lots of YouTube videos on the subject. Also, should Scrapbeak be the boss at Windy Run, this barn will be his storehouse, filled with lots of ammo and goodies. Crossing the road here to head into the foliage to the east will be your moment of highest exposure. So keep an eye on the compound and be wary of players looking out of the main building. Let's begin the CNA to Hemlock pathing. This route is a bit strange and out of the way, but there isn't much cover directly in between CNA and Hemlock. Crossing towards Nicholls first, then pushing up towards the Mound or White House doesn't work particularly well either. While there is some cover, it is the most popular approach to the compound, and you're likely to get ambushed or third-partied if you approach from this angle. This route, however, allows you to go around all of that and maintain solid cover virtually all the way there by traveling through the tree line. If you have some long-range weaponry, this also allows you to find some angles on that more popular approach so that maybe you can take someone off guard. A well-timed frog hop across the river here will get you across quickly and without movement penalty. This route uses an area of the map that rarely sees player activity unless the extraction southeast of Hemlock in the road is active. Should it be there, be wary of teams placing themselves near it. Otherwise, you shouldn't have much to worry about. Hemlock will have a brief sightline on this spot as you cross, but anyone at Hemlock most likely won't be looking in that direction, and they would need a sniper to do anything meaningful at that distance anyway. You can stick to the trees if you have a decent ranged loadout, or use the blind spot at the river to approach the compound should you have something more close quarters combat oriented. As you turn the corner here, keep in mind that straight north from this position, on the other side of the Hemlock compound, is commonly an extraction. So players are hanging around that tree line over yonder, There's a chance that they could look over this way and see you approach. Starting the Brickworks to CNA route, while looping towards the south and then back north seems odd here, it helps avoid a potential ambush location directly across the road from Brickworks when heading towards CNA, as this is the most frequently used approach to the compound. Even if you're heading from CNA to Brickworks, this will avoid sightlines from teams potentially heading across the bridge from Nicholls. In either direction, this will allow you to establish a secure ranged position or push the compounds without giving long-range players a chance to establish line of sight. When heading to CNA, just be sure to keep an eye out across the water after you cross the road here, as players will often sit in the opposing tree line. There are a few risks to keep in mind in this area. There are commonly hive spawns throughout this forest, and a little bit closer to CNA itself, there's also some hellhound spawns that could potentially give away your location or give you a hard time. Also, just across the water here, behind that shack, there's a small sniper tower that players often like to sit in that has frequent sightlines on this area as well. There's also the log stacks in between Brickworks and CNA to the left of this position here to keep in mind, as anyone hiding behind those logs as cover could also establish some sightlines on this approach. Let's start the Wolfshead to Brickworks route. This approach allows you to maintain solid cover in either direction, not allowing for any sightlines from either compound. This also prevents a scenario where you could accidentally stumble into a team coming in from Fort Carmick. On the Wolfshead side of this route, there is a potential extraction location, so keep this in mind when pathing this way. When heading into Brickworks, you don't have to push in from the main archway. You can safely cross the water on the south side, or to your right from here, by pushing yourself up against the compound wall as you cross, which allows you to circumvent the movement penalty. Let's get into the Wolfshead to Ironworks route. Leaving from the south side helps to avoid sightlines from players that could be coming in from either Ironworks or Fort Carmick, and prevents a scenario where you could get shot at from across the pond north of Wolfshead. While this area coming up here is a bit open, players rarely have a reason to look over at this corner of the map, and you shouldn't have to worry too much about sound traps either. I believe occasionally there is a horse in the road coming up here, as well as a few bird spawns, but for the most part you should really only run into the occasional grunt while passing through here. The end of the river here is a potential extraction location, so be wary of this as you cross. If it isn't there, you shouldn't have much to worry about, as players rarely move through this area of the map. Notably, this is also the one spot in the river where you can cross without movement penalty. Using this route will allow you to stay out of sight of the Ironworks roof, as well as the Fort Carmick Tower, and the Wolfshead high ground locations when heading the other way. Make sure to keep a close eye on the lighthouse as you approach, as there could potentially be a sniper or someone holing up in there if Ironworks happens to be the boss layer. It's not super common, but it's definitely worth looking up there so you don't get shot in the back of the head. The spot under the lighthouse is also another potential extraction location, so it's something to keep in mind as you approach that there could be people waiting in the bushes nearby. Beginning the Ironworks to Maw pathing, this route will minimize sightlines from the rooftops or ramparts of either compound. I will note here, however, that while this is the best route I could find, it isn't as well protected as most of the pathing in this video. To be honest, there really isn't a low-risk way to get between these two compounds, but the approach shown here is certainly much safer than running directly across the bridge or the water. While you should be able to stay safe from sightlines from either compound regardless of what direction you're heading in, at least for the most part, you will frequently establish line of sight with the main bridge heading in between Ironworks and Maw. So keep an eye out for players crossing, and even if you do get spotted, you should have lots of cover to pick from. And players rarely have a reason to look over here from that location anyway, but it is something to keep in mind. When approaching Maw like this, be wary of the large sniper tower, and try to keep the foliage between yourself and the large window on the main building that faces west, out towards said sniper tower. When approaching Ironworks, while it is rare, you'll want to keep an eye on the lighthouse in case a sniper has decided to sit at the top. This usually isn't the case, as mentioned before, unless a banish is actively happening at Ironworks. Now we're going to discuss Lawson Delta's high-risk compounds. I'm going to start with my usual disclaimer here and say that you should play in a way that is the most fun for you. My advice here is simply a suggestion should you be looking for the optimal strategy. While I am going to show the best ways to push into these compounds should you have a short-range loadout, when it comes to approaching Fort Carmick, Nicholls Prison, or Sweetbell Flower, my recommendation is don't. Not only do these compounds have a highly imbalanced defensive advantage, but you will also make yourself an easy target for snipers in the surrounding area. There is little to no cover when approaching these compounds, so unless you get there first, you will be at an immense disadvantage. My recommendation when facing a bounty team at these locations would be to either stay outside the compound and look for angles to shoot in from, should you have a long-range loadout, or wait in a nearby compound or easily defensible location, and then cut the bounty team off when they try to leave. You can also take an opportunistic approach and wait for a fight to break out, then push in to take advantage of the chaos. So why do these compounds heavily favor defenders? When it comes to Nicholls, while there is a lot of cover within the walls of the compound, reaching the main building is insanely difficult against experienced players. Almost every first floor entrance can be seen directly from the second story, the last having an angle that doesn't allow you to venture in more than a few steps without being seen. These angles are difficult to see from below, meaning if someone is watching an entrance you use from above, they will almost certainly kill you before you can acquire a target. All of the second story entrances require you to travel across metal surfaces, so anyone inside will automatically know what doorway you're about to use. Even if you do make it inside, there are numerous blind corners and small hallways where you can run into a shotgun lying in wait. Moving on to Sweetbell, the area surrounding the compound is a sniper's paradise. Defenders can see every approach very clearly from inside, meaning you can't get close without taking a large amount of risk. The same can be said for those watching the compound. Snipers can sit anywhere around the compound from great distances and still have large amounts of visibility. This puts anyone with short-range loadouts needing to push in, assuming the compound is actively being defended, at an extreme disadvantage. As far as Fort Carmick goes, well, it's in the name. It's a fort. Forts are designed to have a defensive advantage, so it makes sense that it would be difficult to attack. You can get shot from the high ground at almost every entrance except for the metal liftgate facing Ironworks. That said, because of the liftgate, you have to announce your presence, so while you won't immediately get shot at, everyone in the compound will know you're there. While you can use the tunnels on either side of the compound as cover, there's also a solid chance you run into a corner camper in these areas, for which there is very little counterplay. Now that you know why these compounds are imbalanced, for those who want to risk it for the biscuit, let's take a look at the best approaches. Your biggest risk here will be at the very start, crossing the road to get into the tree line. Once you're back into cover, though, things should be relatively safe until you get close to Nicholls, at which point you'll have to worry about players hiding in the nearby hayfield, as well as players crossing the bridge from Sweetbell. Players like to camp behind the mounds next to the bridge, so if you sprint up to Nicholls, there's a solid chance anyone in that location will hear you, so be wary of this. Nicholls has few sightlines on this approach, so you should be able to get within the compound's walls without much opposition. When pushing into Nicholls from Windy Run, you'll have to cross roads a couple times during this route in order to move between patches of cover. As always, using evasion will help to lower the likelihood of you getting picked off as you cross through the open. Be careful, as the tree line in between Arden and Nicholls will often have players lying in wait if the boss layer is nearby. By the end of the pathing, you will be approaching Nicholls from the same direction as the Arden to Nicholls route. However, I stop a bit sooner in the clip to demonstrate that you can also look for angles from the forest to shoot in from, depending on your loadout. When pushing into Nicholls from CNA, leaving from the ground level will minimize potential sightlines on you as you leave. Crossing the water is dangerous, but there's a narrow stretch where you can minimize movement penalty with a frog hop across. As you approach, you'll want to keep in mind that a team pushing up through the trees from Hemlock could come up behind you, or a team coming from the west using the train cars as cover could spot you. There's also the issue of anyone hiding out in the quadrant of buildings, over to the left where you push up. So long as someone isn't on the balcony of Nicholls or just inside the wall on the ground level, you should be able to get within the outer walls without someone inside being able to see you. Let's discuss pushing into Sweetbell from Lawson Station. We're starting the route at this white shack south of Lawson. Just remember to be careful when crossing from the compound towards the shack, because if you get caught out by players hiding in the construction building, or coming in from Blanc, you'll have a hard time falling back for cover. A team coming in from Ma can also easily stumble into you while using this pathing, so be sure to keep an eye out in that direction as you move along. Beyond these initial concerns, you won't have to worry too much about sightlines until you get to the houses near the waterline. At this point, things become dangerous, as you have windows of exposure to the compound, as well as a variety of other exposed angles. You have the large sniper tower in between Carmick and Sweetbell, players coming in from Carmick itself, sightlines from the Carmick tower or ramparts, players potentially coming in from Ma, and players possibly hiding in the hayfield in between Lawson and Sweetbell. While this approach easily has the most cover leading up to Sweetbell when compared to the other sides of the compound, it is extremely difficult to get inside without a defending team being able to shoot at you from a multitude of different angles. Starting the Ma to Sweetbell route, you can use the same start as the Ma to Godard pathing if you're worried about crossing the open area in front of the sniper tower. As you head into the tree line, be wary of teams that could be coming in from the north through the swamp towards Ma. This will be your highest area of concern as you begin the route. In addition to this, there's also all sorts of potential sound traps you could trigger off to the right of your position. There's often bird spawns near here, hives along the hill, occasionally an immolator, I believe. There's a horse coming up in the road that sometimes spawns there. All sorts of things to look out for. Crossing the road will make for a brief window of exposure. Just be sure to keep an eye out for teams coming in from either Lawson or Ironworks. Be sure to use proper evasion as you cross, and should you come under enemy fire, it should be easy enough to find cover. As you approach Sweetbell, since this essentially turns into the same route as the previous one, you of course have all the same risks to keep in mind, with all the various sight lines coming in from the surrounding areas. Aside from the usual concerns, be careful as there's often a horse in the road, near where I just crossed there in the clip, and there's also often some armoreds up here in the trees, just beside Sweetbell. I'm using Brickworks as a general starting point here. Regardless of the direction you're coming from, however, I think the area of the forest that contains the ruins in between Carmick and CNA is the safest place to plant yourself to avoid having to deal with Carmick's immense defensive advantage. You of course can approach the wall from here if you have a close-range loadout. You'll just have to watch out for players on the wall above or hunters camping the entrances below. Should you have something with more range, you have a lot of cover to work with in this area, and it is close enough to be able to pursue a bounty team that tries to flee. Want to know how to safely navigate Stillwater Bayou? Check out the video that's about to pop up on your screen. Until next time though, good hunting in the bayou, and I'll see you all on the next one.